At Tan Son Nhut, late summer 1964, a staff sergeant named Roy Dalton sorted through a stack of translated documents, pulled off a dead North Vietnamese courier south of Bien Hoa. One assessment, attributed to a senior cadre in the People's Army Logistics Directorate, cataloged American air assets by threat level, fixed-wing propeller aircraft rated last, below helicopters. The phrase the translator used, slow, unarmored, and of no consequence in close battle. The author had a point. The C-47 Skytrain dated to 1935. Douglas built the first one before Pearl Harbor. By 1964, it hauled cargo, dropped leaflets, flew loudspeaker missions over the jungle at 120 knots. Nobody's idea of a weapons platform. Most of the real story behind this airplane never made the evening news. If that's the kind of history worth hearing, hit subscribe, leave a comment if you flew one or knew someone who did, and drop a like so this reaches the people who actually care. 14 months after Dalton read that captured brief, a Special Forces camp at Duc Co sat surrounded. December 1965. 2 battalions of North Vietnamese regulars, elements of the 32nd and 66th Regiments, seasoned units that had already overrun smaller outposts along the Cambodian border, pressed the perimeter after dark. Mortar fire walked across the compound in steady intervals. The camp's defenders radioed for air support and got a strange answer. Inbound was an FC-47, the same cargo hauler the captured document had dismissed, except someone at Wright-Patterson had bolted 3 General Electric SUU, 11A gun pods to its left flank. Each pod held a 6-barreled GAU, 2 minigun capable of cycling 6,000 rounds per minute. 18,000 rounds per minute total, fired broadside in a left-hand pylon turn that kept every tracer converging on a patch of earth the size of a football field. The crew orbited at 3,000 feet. Captain Jack Harvey, one of the early Project Gunship 1 pilots, flew left-hand circles over the tree line for 4 hours, hosing down muzzle flashes with a river of 7.62 millimeter fire, so dense it looked from the ground, like a solid red cone pouring out of the sky. Survivors at the camp described the sound as a long, unbroken moan, not individual shots, just pressure. The North Vietnamese assault stalled before dawn. They pulled back across the border carrying their dead. A 40,000-pound cargo plane designed to haul mail across the Pacific in 1942 had just broken a regimental-strength night attack. The captured assessment never mentioned that possibility. The fluorescent lights at Wright-Patterson hummed at a frequency that made everything feel like 2 in the morning. Captain Ronald Terry sat under them through most of 1963, writing memos that came back with polite refusals stapled to the front page. The idea he kept pushing had roots older than the airplane itself. In the 1920s, an Army Air Corps lieutenant named Fred Nelson proposed mounting a machine gun sideways in a slow-flying observation plane and orbiting a fixed point on the ground. Lateral suppression, continuous fire delivered in a banking turn, so the rounds stayed concentrated on one spot instead of streaking past in a single strafing run. Nelson published the concept. Nobody funded it. The paper sat in a filing cabinet for nearly 40 years. Terry found it. He also found a missionary pilot in South America, Nate Saint, who had used a similar pylon turn to lower supply buckets to jungle clearings. Geometry, not firepower, but the same principle. Terry combined the two and pitched a weapons platform built around the cheapest, most available airframe in the inventory, the C-47. An airplane your grandmother could have flown. That phrase appears in a 1964 internal briefing document from Tactical Air Command. Their word, not mine. TAC wanted jets, supersonic fighter bombers, the F-105. Thunder Chief cost 3 times what Terry's entire prototype budget requested, and TAC ordered hundreds of them. A retired cargo plane circling at 120 knots did not fit the vision. Terry submitted his proposal 7 times, 7 separate requests for a live fire test, denied, tabled, redirected, lost in routing. The 8th attempt reached a brigadier general named Gilbert Grubb, who had flown transports over the hump in World War II and understood what a slow, reliable airplane could do in the dark over rough terrain. Grubb signed off on a single proof-of-concept test at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. 3 SUU-11A pods, 1 tired C-47, a clearing in the pine scrub marked with white lime circles. Terry got his test. The results at Eglin rewrote the rules for close air support. August 2nd, 1964, 2:14 in the afternoon, Florida time. Terry's crew banked left over the Eglin range at 120 knots and opened fire. The math mattered more than the speed. A jet making a strafing pass at 450 knots covered the target in under 2 seconds. The pilot pressed the trigger, released, pulled up, circled back for another run. Total time on target per pass, a fraction of a heartbeat. The AC-47 in its pylon turn never left. It orbited continuously, all 3 miniguns bearing down through the open cargo door and 2 fuselage windows on the port side. 6,000 rounds per minute per gun, 18,000 combined. At that rate, in a 3-second burst, the aircraft placed a bullet into every square yard of a target roughly the size of a football field. 120 knots, 62 miles per hour, slower than a Cessna 172 on a good day. If the Air Force had built a faster platform, the geometry would have collapsed. The turn radius widens with speed, and the bullet cone spreads until precision is gone. Slowness kept the fire concentrated in a circle, tight enough to walk around in 30 seconds. Had Terry proposed the same concept using the C-130 Hercules in 1963, he might have gotten funding on the first try. Bigger airframe, more prestige. But the Hercules cost 4 times as much per flight hour, and there weren't surplus ones gathering dust on ramp space across Southeast Asia. That came later. Anyway, the Eglin Range crew recovered the target panels and counted impacts. A colonel named John Gruning, observing from the tower, wrote in his assessment, "Saturation exceeded anything achievable by tactical fighters at any speed." Terry flew back to Wright-Patterson with those panels in the cargo hold. Photographs of the shredded plywood circulated through TAC headquarters within a week. 7 rejections deep, the airplane had answered in brass and splinters. 2,640 sorties in 1966 alone. The 4th Air Commando Squadron flew the AC-47, call sign Spooky, out of Tan Son Nhut, Nha Trang, Da Nang, Pleiku. They flew at night, almost exclusively, orbiting outposts and hamlets under siege at 3,000 feet, with running lights off and miniguns hot. The operational claim stands uncontested in Air Force records. No outpost defended by Spooky was ever overrun while the aircraft remained on station. That record cost something. The AC-47 had no armor worth mentioning. The fuselage skin, .04-inch aluminum, stopped nothing heavier than rain. Ground fire punched through it like paper. Spooky flew predictable circles at predictable altitudes, and the North Vietnamese learned the geometry fast. They positioned 12.7mm heavy machine guns along the expected orbit path. By 1969, crews reported tracers rising past the cockpit windows, so close the heat fogged the glass. On February 24, 1969, an AC-47 piloted by Captain Alan Greer took fire over Long Bin at 2200 hours. A 12.7 round severed the left engine oil line. Greer held the orbit for another 41 seconds, long enough for the ground controller to confirm the perimeter had stabilized, before the engine seized. The aircraft rolled left and struck a ridgeline 11 miles east of the camp. All 8 crew members died at 10:03 p.m., 40 minutes into their second sortie of the night. 12 AC-47s went down in combat over Vietnam. 47 crewmen killed. The outposts held. At Hurlburt Field, Florida, the AC-130J. Ghost Rider sits on the ramp today, carrying a 105mm howitzer, a 30mm chain gun, precision-guided munitions. It costs roughly $68 million. It orbits in a pylon turn. The geometry hasn't changed since 1964. Fred Nelson's 1920s sketch, Nate Saint's bucket drops over the jungle, Terry's shredded plywood at Eglin, the same banked circle and lateral fire, the same principle that 7 offices at Tactical Air Command stamped not recommended. The AC-47 flew its last combat sortie for the United States Air Force in 1969. The airframe transferred to the South Vietnamese Air Force, which kept flying them until Saigon fell. Some of those planes had been built in 1943. They outlasted the war they entered and the country they defended. The North Vietnamese gunners who shot them down operated under standing orders to concentrate fire on any aircraft holding a sustained bank. They adapted fast and they fought well. 12 crews paid for flying predictable circles over men who knew exactly where to aim. Ronald Terry retired from the Air Force as a colonel. He settled in the Florida Panhandle, not far from the pine scrub at Eglin, where the first burst hit those lime-white circles. He spent years after retirement consulting on gunship development. The AC-130A Spectre, the AC-130H, each generation bigger and heavier, each one still turning left and firing through the side of the airplane. That captured North Vietnamese assessment from '64, the one Roy Dalton sorted through at Tan Son Nhut, never listed a cargo plane as a threat. By '66, updated threat briefings recovered from captured positions did. The AC-47 had its own entry.